I am Betty Michelle, and I am beyond excited to have you join me for my podcast, The Purpose Talk, your weekly dose of inspiration, biblical truths, practical guidance, and heartfelt conversations, empowering you to live a life of purpose, creating the life you've always dreamed of. Each week, you'll join me to embark on a journey towards discovering your purpose, truly uncovering the unique gifts and talents that define you, and gaining clarity on the direction your life is meant to take. We will embark on a journey towards pursuing your dream, following the passions that ignite your soul, and turning your aspirations into reality with unwavering determination. Taking bold steps to live out your true calling and transforming your intentions into impactful actions that lead you to a fulfilling and purpose-driven life. So join me every week on this journey to pursue purpose. It's one worth taking. Let's go. Hey, welcome to another episode of The Purpose Talk, where we are discovering how to live a life of purpose, one intentional step at a time. I'm your host, Betty Michelle, and today we're diving into mindful action, aligning purpose with daily choices. As we kick off this episode, I can't help but share my love for the fall season. It is finally here, y'all. It's such a beautiful time of year, isn't it? I mean, the vibrant colors of the leaves, the crisp air, and the cozy sweaters, because it's sweater and boot season. It all feels so magical. Plus, my birthday is just around the corner, and I always love celebrating during my favorite season. And let's not forget that Christmas is right on the heels of fall, which brings even more joy and anticipation. I am so excited to pick out the color scheme for my Christmas tree this year. So it's all fun and games as we jump into fall. And speaking of fall, I have to mention the crazy Memphis weather. So I'm coming in from Memphis, y'all. One day it feels like we're in the thick of summer, and then boom, out of nowhere, fall swoops in, sometimes disappearing just as quickly as it arrives. It is crazy. It's like trying to catch a fleeting moment of beauty before it's gone. And for me, my yard is filled with trees. So if fall is going to be here, come on. Let the leaves fall so I can do the work and then sit back on my patio and just enjoy the weather. So it's crazy. As unpredictable as it may seem, it reminds me of life itself, right? Where we're often having to adapt to change and just trust the journey. And with the season of fall, that's exactly what we're doing, right? We're embracing the beautiful season as it comes, and then knowing that as quickly as it comes, it may be gone. And that's okay. But it also reminds me of our topic today, diving into how we can take mindful action and align our daily choices with purpose, right? Because let's face it, life is unpredictable. 1 minute, everything is going well, and the next minute, boom, something jumps right in and it takes over and it knocks us off our path. And we're just going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about it. In this episode, we will be discovering how can being mindful help us take actions that actually reflect what we care about. We will be pursuing how can we make sure that our everyday choices, no matter what is thrown our way, whether it's good or bad or in between, how can we make sure that our everyday choices are aligned with what's really important? And lastly, we will be acting. How can we practice mindfulness to stay focused on the things that matter most? To set the tone, I want to share Proverbs 16:9. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. And that's powerful. It's a reminder that while we can create plans, it's God who truly guides our steps. And here's the key. We need to take mindful actions to walk in that guidance. So today, we're going to unpack how mindfulness can help us act in alignment with God's purpose for our lives. We'll discuss practical ways to incorporate purpose into everyday decisions and how mindfulness plays a critical role in keeping our actions focused on what truly matters. Here's the big question. How can we use mindfulness to align our daily actions with God's purpose for our lives? Let's jump into it. We'll start by exploring the connection between mindfulness and trusting God's plan, especially in moments of uncertainty, like the season of fall, right? You just never know where you're going to get. But at the core, right, mindfulness is being fully present in the moment, no matter what the moment is. It's intentionally focusing on where we are and what we're doing without distraction or judgment. It's the practice of slowing down, paying attention, and being still enough to hear God's voice, even when the world around us feels chaotic. Mindfulness offers powerful benefits like improving focus, reducing stress, and enhancing decision making. But when we combine mindfulness with faith in God's plan, something transformational happens. We begin to trust that every small action, every choice is part of a greater purpose. Mindfulness becomes a tool that helps us pause, reflect, and align our actions with God's will, especially when we don't have all the answers. When we are mindful, we aren't just moving through the motion, that everyday schedule. All of us have, right? The motion of just doing the things and getting it done. Mindfulness causes us to stop, to slow down, and not just move through the motion. It tells us that we're choosing to engage with life in a way that honors the path God has laid out for us. This calls us to trust Him in the present moment, even when the future really seems uncertain. Research from Harvard Medical School suggests that practicing mindfulness helps us become more aware of our thoughts, emotions, and impulses, giving us the space to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. Mindfulness reduces stress and increases our ability to make more thoughtful, purpose-driven decisions. When we apply this concept to our faith, we're reminded to stop, seek God's wisdom, and trust His timing before we act. My friend, I am actively trying to be still, slow down, and trust God's plan for my life in this season. So today I am talking to you about mindfulness and the impact of doing that in everyday life. How can we make mindful decisions or purpose-driven decisions every single day, knowing that God has already established our steps and planned our lives according to His will? You see, mindfulness is a spiritual discipline that helps us align our hearts with God's purpose, whether we know the purpose that He has for us or not. Mindfulness reminds us that we're called to trust Him in every action. Colossians 3:23 tells us, "Whatever you do, work heartedly as for the Lord and not for men." Every decision we make, whether big or small, should be done with purpose, knowing we are serving God. Mindfulness helps us stay connected to that truth and trust His plan. As we take a moment to reflect on mindfulness in our faith, I want to just look at the life of Jesus. What's interesting enough is that Jesus knew what He was here to do. He knew it, so much so that when the time came, He asked God to remove this, right? It's crazy how Jesus knew the plan for His life. He knew His assignment, and He continued to move with mindfulness and intention. He was always mindful and always intentional in His actions, whether He was healing the sick, preaching the gospel, or choosing His disciples. Jesus acted with a deep awareness of His purpose. He lived fully and present in every moment, completely aware of God's plan for His life. It's crazy that I'm telling you here that in the same way we are called to live mindfully, trusting that God is directing our steps even when we don't have the full picture. I know. You're probably saying right now, Jesus knew full well what He was here to do. And I am every day searching for my purpose or how it is aligned with my actions or for some sense of direction. I get it, my friend. I do. I'm in the same boat. But I am still challenging you to think about how you can continue searching for purpose in such a mindful way. I'm also reminding you of the perfect example here of Jesus Christ Himself, someone who knew the plan that God had for His life and was so mindful and intentional about that plan. Because you see, Jesus reminds us that regardless of whether the plan for our life is such a big sacrifice as the one he did on the cross for us, or maybe small in your everyday living, because there is purpose in your everyday living. So no matter whether big or small, there's still a call for us to be mindful and intentional in the way in which we approach our purpose, whether it's purpose in life, purpose in a season, or purpose in a moment. We have to be mindful and intentional about our everyday choices, our everyday action. Proverbs 16:9 reminds us that the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his step. You see, trusting God's plan requires mindfulness. It's about being present, discerning God's voice, and acting with purpose, knowing he is guiding us. But here's the thing. It is not easy. It is not easy at all. In fact, it is one of the most hardest things to do because we are moving with such uncertainty and searching so hard and so deep and so wide for our purpose and what God is calling us to do in everyday moments, in seasons, and in life. And it requires patience, it requires trust, it requires faith, and it requires surrender. And those four things, my goodness, are hard. It's hard to do when you don't have a clue or you have part of a plan, but not the whole plan. So let's talk about ways in which we can be mindful and intentional in our everyday actions. One, pause and pray. Whenever uncertainty creeps in, the first step is simply to pause and pray. Mindfulness teaches us to be still, and in that stillness, we invite God to speak into our situation. In Philippians 4:6, we are encouraged, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Let your requests be made known to God. You see, prayer is the mindful act of surrendering our worries to God, acknowledging that he is in control. By pausing to pray, we shift our focus from our uncertainty to his faithfulness. Number two, stay present in today. Often when we are faced with uncertainty, our minds race towards the future, worrying about what could go wrong or trying to figure everything out. But Jesus reminds us in Matthew 6:34, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. You see, mindfulness calls us to stay present in today, focusing on what God is doing right now. We are to fully engage in the present and trust that God will take care of tomorrow, one step at a time. You have to stay focused on what God is asking you to do today and let him guide you toward the future. And lastly, take small, faithful steps. Trusting God's plan doesn't mean we need to know every detail before we act. But my goodness, how we wish that we had the full picture. And I've reminded you all before, and I'll remind you again. If only we could see the full picture, if only, we would run. We would run and we would hide. Because if God showed us the full plan that he has for our lives, we will feel defeated. It's our human nature to either fight or flee. It's in our human nature. So often we ask for full plan. We want to know this big picture plan of what our lives entail, every single detail and every single step. But I guarantee that God revealing it in small steps is your protection. It's divine protection because he knows you so well. You are his child after all. He knows you so well that he knows that you would run. You would run from your purpose every chance you got. So he does not give us the full picture. Instead, we are called to trust in his plan and know that every detail of his plan is for our good. And sometimes it's simply about taking small, faithful steps and trusting that God will reveal more as we go. Mindfulness helps us to focus on the step in front of us without being overwhelmed by the bigger picture. Psalms chapter 119, verse 105 tells us, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. God may not show us the entire path, but he gives us enough light to take the next step. By practicing mindfulness, we can stay grounded in the present, taking action with confidence that God is guiding our journey. When we apply these 3 steps, pausing to pray, staying present in today, and taking small, faithful steps, we actively are showing God that we trust his plan for our lives, even in the face of uncertainty. We show him that we are exercising not only trust, but our faith in what he can do. And mindfulness is the key to staying focused on what matters most and aligning our decisions with God's purpose and trusting him to lead the way. We have to be in full surrender, in full trust, and in full faith. Mindfulness is the key to that. It's the key to staying focused, staying faithful, and trusting in God's plan. Here's the thing. While mindfulness and purpose are vital, there's another key element that we cannot overlook. One that I'm already talking about, but I want to go really deep here. Trusting God's plan. What do we do when we have to trust God's plan, but we don't fully know or understand it? Now, let's be honest. Many of us want to know everything, right? We want to know every single detail. And God is calling us out of wanting to know full picture and into trusting and being faithful to him. In my own personal journey, I tell you all this because I had to learn to relinquish control. And the only way to help you understand and know how to be mindful is to share this story. About 10 years ago, I went to a New Year's Eve party thrown by a friend. It was a burn party where we were to write down everything we wanted to release from our lives and then burn them up as a symbolic act of letting go. And I'm sure for some of you all out there listening, you've attended one of these parties. Life-changing, if I may say so myself. That night, I made a decision to burn something so incredibly close to me, like literally the fabric of my being, was to plan every single detail of my life. And as I reflected on the year that I had just had, I made a decision to relinquish all control over my life. And when I say reflection, I was reflecting on everything I planned out the year before, every single thing that did not go right, every single detail of what could have gone wrong. And I was saying to myself, what is in the way? What is in the way? And I made a decision to not plan my life for the next year. Now, hear me well. At the time, I thought I was just relinquishing control for 1 year. 1 year, y'all. But here I am 10 plus years later, and I do not plan my life at all. No plan. I don't even attend vision board parties anymore. So here I am telling you that I was a serious planner every single year. For years, I took pride in planning every single detail of my life. I spent hours creating vision boards and writing out goals for every area of my life, for my spiritual growth, for financial success, for my love life, for my family dynamics, for my career, and my personal development. I will write out a plan for all 5 areas. I mapped out every year like a blueprint for the perfect life. My need to control everything gave me a false sense of security. That's what it was. I mapped out this beautiful plan. I had it all figured out. I had the blueprint. I was ready to set go to jump into the new year and make it all happen. It was my sense of security, like a little blanket of comfort. I knew that I had a plan and I would execute. Because if you ask any of my friends to name one word that describes me, I guarantee most of them would say, she's an executor. So here I am every year mapping out a plan and ready to execute. And every year it didn't go as planned. Of course it didn't, right? I didn't leave room for God to do anything in my life. You see, I was meticulous with these plans down to what my life would look like 5 or even 10 years ahead. Because I was planning it out, right? So I had to know how the decisions for the current year that I was planning for would impact me 5 to 10 years down the road. That's how serious it was for me, guys. But in doing all of this planning, I really left no room for God's plan. I wanted to know the outcome of every situation before I stepped into it, almost as if I could guarantee success by planning everything out. At the time, I didn't realize how much I was boxing God out, trying to control what only He could orchestrate. And I was a girl of faith. I mean, I was praying over these plans, right? This year, for whatever reason, I was reminded of what it looked like to box God out of my life, even though I thought I was including Him in the plan. Silly me. Silly me. I was including Him in the plan by praying over the plan. My goodness. I just thank God for growth, okay? But here's the big thing about this planning. When things didn't go the way I envisioned, when relationships didn't work out, when career goals were delayed or advanced, if I may say so myself, or finances didn't match my projections, I was hit with overwhelming disappointment every single time. The crazy thing is, I was planning my disappointment. And you know how they say God laughs? If you want to hear God laugh, then just tell Him your plan. Man, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I know He was hysterically laughing at me. It was hysterical laughter. I just know He was saying, my child, if only you knew. Because I was planning that deep. I was in it, you all. I was committed to the plans. And it's crazy because I was setting myself up for disappointment. Now, this is hindsight, right? At the time, I thought that I was setting myself up for success. But what it turned into is year after year after year of disappointment because some areas of the plan went well and some areas of the plan just did not go well. So I felt defeated, like I was somehow failing despite all my efforts. But looking back, I realized that I wasn't allowing space for God to move. My overly controlled plans were just crowding out the divine purpose He had for me. And it was in a season of frustration that I guess I realized I needed to let it go. I needed to surrender the illusion of control and trust that God's plan was bigger than mine. I don't know what called me to burn up control and vision board planning that year, but I was called to it and I did it. I just took the leap of faith and did it. Because I do realize now that the only way I could do this was by becoming mindful, being very mindful, not just of my actions, right? Because the actions weren't bad. I was planning my life, as most of us do, right? But I had to be mindful of my own need to control everything. You see, mindfulness works in several ways. And one of the ways in which mindfulness works is to be mindful of what is not working in your life and then to reflect on why it's not working. So this year, I was just called to mindfulness, not intentionally, but I was called to mindfulness and how my need to control everything was blocking God's blessings in my life. I had to reflect on how my tightly held plans were playing a role in my disappointment. And when I became mindful of how I wasn't allowing God to lead because I was trying to write my own story, I had to do something about it. So this burn party, and I just thank my friends so much for hosting such a party that year. But it was in this moment of planning for the next year, I may add, that I said I would release and I would let go. And it was the best decision I could have made for my life because 10 plus years later, I no longer plan. And I simply just trust God with whatever He has for me because He knows me best. And I tell you all in almost every episode, you cannot pursue purpose without pursuing God's plan. So here I am sharing how I had to release control to step into not only God's plan, but to step into my purpose. You see, mindfulness became a tool for me. It became a tool for surrender. It taught me to be present in the moment and to trust that even though I didn't have all the answers, God did. Mindfulness reminds us to pause, to breathe, and focus on the present instead of being obsessed with the future. And I know that's easier said than done, but mindfulness helps us remember that God sees the bigger picture when we can only see what's right in front of us. And that's how we begin to trust His plan. We need to see what's in front of us and be mindful of our everyday actions while trusting that God has the bigger picture and He will reveal it in due time. So to help us with this, because I realize I'm asking of a big lift right now from you all, but to help us with this process, I want you to be intentional about these reflection questions. Ask yourself, one, what area of my life am I trying to control? And how might that be affecting my trust in God and His plan for my life? Two, how can I create space in my plan for God's guidance? And three, what small intentional steps can I take today to align my actions with God's will? I want you to think about your life as a compass. When we trust God's plan, we're allowing Him to be our true north, guiding our actions and decisions. Just as a compass helps us find our way, trusting God directs us towards His purpose for our lives. It's about letting go of our tightly held maps and embracing the journey with faith, trust, and full surrender. Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us of this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Trusting God's plan doesn't mean we'll have all the answers. It means acknowledging that God's ways are higher than ours and that He sees what we cannot. Mindfulness is the tool that helps us lean into that trust. It's about being fully present, slowing down long enough to release control, surrender our plans, and listen for God's guidance. When we practice mindfulness, we stop worrying about what we can't control and stop trying to plan every detail. Instead, we focus on the now, the present opportunities to trust God, obey His voice, and take purposeful action. So let's keep diving in deep. How can we put mindfulness into action every single day? You see, it's critical to understand the importance of intentional action, making deliberate choices that align to what really matters to us, rather than simply reacting out of habit or stress. Research from the Clinical Psychology Review, Effects of Mindfulness on Psychological Health, shows that mindfulness can significantly improve our self-regulation. This means that when we practice being mindful, we can pause before we act. How many of you need to just slow down and pause before you react? My hand is raised. You can't see it, but I can take a lesson or two from myself on mindfulness, okay? You see, the pause before we act gives us the space to reflect. Does this action align with my values? Is it leading me towards my goal? Is this how I want to show up in this moment? Mindfulness encourages us to step back and consider our choices. Instead of getting swept up in the chaos around us, we can take a moment to breathe, reflect, and make decisions that genuinely reflect who we are and what we value. Now, you know I have to pull an example from the Bible. And my girl Esther is the perfect example of this because man, was it chaotic, okay? Her story is one of pure chaos. When we think about purpose, right? Esther was placed in a position of influence for a specific purpose. It's highlighted in Esther 4:14. If you know the story, you know, and if not, we're going into it. Mordecai reminds her that she may have come to her royal position for such a time as this. Now, I know everyone remembers that famous line. For such a time as this, okay? So let me give you a recap of Esther's story and why that famous line, for such a time as this, is so important. Here's the background. Esther is a Jewish orphan. She is raised by her cousin Mordecai after losing her parents. She is chosen to be the queen of Persia after a beauty contest to replace the current queen. That's the quick background. And then there's a threat. A high-ranking official, Haman, plots to exterminate the Jewish people, gaining the king's approval to carry out this decree, okay? So basically, he's about to take the Jewish community out, okay? Then Mordecai has a plea. Mordecai urges Esther to use her position to appeal to the king and to save their people, reminding her that she has come to her royal position, right, for such a time as this. Esther 4:14, right? We just talked about it. Then there's a courageous action. My goodness. Despite the risk of approaching the king without an invitation, because at that time, the consequence was death if you approached the king and you were not invited into his presence, right? Esther has to demonstrate her courage and decides to speak up for her people. And then there's a strategic plan, okay? She has to be strategic about how she does this. So first courageous, then strategic. So she invites the king and Haman to a series of banquets, using these occasions to reveal her Jewish identity and expose Haman's plot. So hear me. The king marries a Jewish orphan. Then there's a plot twist from Haman to exterminate the Jewish people. And then Mordecai says, my goodness, Esther, now is the time, if ever, to save our people. And then Esther says, but the consequence of that, of what you're asking me to do, to go to the king, it's death. So let me figure this out. So then she gives this strategic plan and how she'll do it, right? So she invites the king and Haman to a series of banquets where she exposes her Jewish identity and then exposes Haman's plan. And then there's a turning of the tide. Esther's bravery and wisdom leads to Haman's downfall. So the king orders Haman to be executed, and the decree against the Jewish people is reversed. And then there's the celebration. Esther and Mordecai establishes the celebration of Purim, right? So Esther and Mordecai established the festival of Purim to commemorate the salvation of the Jewish people, ensuring that their story and deliverance will be remembered, okay? So that's the quick version and background of Esther. So the famous line of, for such a time as this, comes from that, okay? So Esther's journey is the perfect illustration of mindful action, the perfect illustration. You see, she didn't rush into the king's presence without careful consideration. Instead, she practiced mindfulness, my friends. She practiced mindfulness by waiting on God's timing and guidance. She approached her difficult situation with intention, seeking clarity through prayer and fasting before making her move. So Esther's journey teaches us valuable lessons about mindfulness and intentionality. And I know I gave you her story really, really quickly, and I encourage you to go back and read the story of Esther. It's such a small story in the Bible, but one of great power. Esther's journey teaches us valuable lessons about mindfulness and intentionality. 1, awareness of timing. Esther knew the importance of timing in her actions. She didn't rush to the king. Instead, she waited for the right moment, demonstrating how mindfulness helps us recognize when to act and when to pause. Number 2, seeking guidance. Before taking any major steps, Esther sought guidance through prayer and fasting. This reflects how mindfulness encourages us to connect with God and seek His direction in our choices, ensuring our actions are aligned with His will. And lastly, number 3, courageous action. When the time came, Esther acted with courage and clarity, fully aware of the potential consequences. You see, mindfulness allows us to face our fears and take intentional steps, trusting that God will guide us through uncertainty. My friend, we can take a page or two from Esther's book. In our own lives, when we face challenging situations or decisions, we can approach them mindfully. By trusting that God's purpose will unfold as we take steps aligned with His will, we allow ourselves to be instruments of His plan. So not write out the plan and give it to God. We allow God to guide our steps, aligning us with His will, and we become the instrument of His plan. As I wrap up with today's episode, let's reflect on key takeaways. Trusting God's plan means leaning into the present, surrendering control, and taking small, faithful steps forward. Mindfulness can strengthen our trust in God by helping us stay focused on the now, praying with intention, and taking purposeful action. And lastly, when we align our decisions with God's will and trust His timing, we experience a deeper sense of peace and fulfillment. Here's my challenge for you today. Choose one of these 3 ways to practice trusting God's plan. Whether it's staying present in today, surrendering control of your future, or taking the next step towards intentionality, be sure to take mindful action and watch how God works in your life. I want to leave you with this final scripture from Isaiah 55, 8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declared the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. My friend, trust that God's plan will reveal itself in due time, even when you don't fully understand it. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at info@betamichellemc.com with your thoughts or questions from today's episode. Let's keep this conversation going. Remember, stay mindful, stay faithful, and stay blessed.